Our final panel this evening is on employability, entrepreneurship, and development. And with me I have this panel of distinguished visitors. And in beginning I will just have them introduce themselves. From Ife, I'd just like everyone to tell us a bit about the work you do, your interests, and you may then proceed to your presentations. We will then proceed to questions and then open, hopefully, time permitting, for questions from the audience. Thank you.
Now there is quite a lot to talk about because my aim is to talk a bit about what we're communicating and what the things we communicate mean. So instead of actually going into the main sort of into a big long thesis, I hope I tell you a few stories and raise in your minds a few questions that you might want to consider in your spare time. Now my main story is in 2009, okay? So in 2009, if you were in the UK at that time, the main talk was the bicentenary of the end of the abolition of the slave trade. And everyone kept talking about it. Actually, not everyone. Because I found that this discussion was limited to black groups and maybe left-leaning white intellectuals. True. But do you know what I found most interesting was that 2009 was also another bicentenary that wasn't much talked about, but was very important for me as a blind person. And a certain gentleman called Louis Braille was born in 2009. Now, for those who don't know about Louis Braille, he was born in a little village outside Paris called Coupouet. I don't know if that's properly pronounced. And about a year or two into his life, his short life, which only lasted about 40-something years, he was playing with a tool in his father's shed and poked out his eye. Okay, don't go all, or don't look like that at me, right? But from that point on, he went to a school for the blind and developed a system by which blind people read. So when all of you were not talking about the bicentenary of Louis Braille, I was, because he was important to me. And so a friend of mine from Nigeria was invited to a conference in Coupouet. And he said, can I come along? And I didn't, because, why? Because they were hosted in Euro Disney. I thought that's too expensive for me. But when he got back, I asked him, I said, well, why did you guys go to Euro Disney? And he said, because Louis Braille was born around there. And now Louis Braille has been doubly underserved because everyone's talking about Euro Disney and not about Louis Braille. Everyone's talking about the bicentenary of the end of abolition of slave trade and not about Louis Braille. Poor guy. But this thing taught me quite a number of lessons about what we communicate and how and what it means actually. Seriously. So one of the first things I learned actually is things are much more than what you say. Communication is really much more than that. It's a lot about what you do as well. And it's a lot about the meaning of that. So suddenly, I'm feeling underserved because my hero is not being heard. And that's telling me a lot about what they think about me as a person. Because without Braille, I wouldn't even be talking to you because I wouldn't have written my thesis, I wouldn't have talked to all the people I've talked to. Maybe Dr. Foluke wouldn't even have known me. See what I mean? So, it's very important to know that what we say is so important, and it's also important as to what we do not say. Does that make sense? But I'll tell you a little bit more. I'll tell you a little bit more about what we've been talking about. So, now imagine, for example, right? Just imagine, for example, that they had all these left-leaning intellectuals and black people talking. It kind of reminded me sometimes about how they talked at the end of the Second World War, about the end of, if you go to Germany, that's what they're always talking about. But sometimes, as we have said already, discussion is so very narrowly defined. Think about the abolition of the slave trade, for example. They talked about slave trade over 400 years, and we've talked here, and we've said a lot of things were missed out. I mean, that gentleman from Sierra Leone, for example, he comes from Freetown, which was established because those people who were stopped by those patrolling warships didn't send the slaves back to their homelands, but created a completely separate colony for them. But no one talks about that. So the whole discussion, and then again, the other thing is, what they were talking about the slave trade didn't result in very much because it was narrowly defined. I attended an event very recently, and they were trying to create this event, and they said they wanted to create it for Africans. So I was there with a lot of left-leaning intellectuals as well, and Sudanese refugees and myself. And in the town that I was thinking, in the university that I was thinking, is that the only representation of Africans? There is an African Caribbean society. Why weren't they invited? If you want to be linked with the community, I don't know, we may not have a place as developed as Bristol in terms of movements and things like that. But we have an African shop, we have a black majority church, we have places where you can find people, but they weren't found. And so the discussion becomes very narrowed to what the people want to hear or what the people want to talk about. And I asked myself a few other questions. I said, why? I said, is it that we other blacks have put ourselves in a ghetto where we're not talking, we're not bringing our voices out? Is that it? I'm not sure. I'm absolutely not sure. But I think it's something that we need to think about, because part of communication is talking, is speaking, is being heard, is hearing. And also, strangely enough, part of communication is that it's two-sided, actually multifaceted. And an important thing is what we are trying to say, because there is a giver in communication and a receiver. What we are really trying to say, the most important message, is that all are welcome into the discussion. Think about it. When Obama had this slogan, he said, "Yes, we can." Actually, the main communication lesson isn't that Americans could do things, but that all Americans were involved in doing. When Trump comes out and says, "Oh, hello guys, let's make America great," he didn't say, "I will make America great." Okay, in its interpretation, obviously, it's a lot narrower than every American is trying to make America great, obviously. But at least there is an involvement of all the facets, of all the aspects of society. Because the truth is, and the real truth is that communication there are many stakeholders, very, very many. And all stakeholders must be involved if communication is to make sense. Is that correct? Yeah, is to make sense. There is a receiving and a giving end. But it also has consequences. What I say to you, as I explained earlier, has consequences for what you think, for what your aspirations are, for who you are, in fact. Think about it. In 2007, I used to be part of an organization, and we held a conference called the International Conference of Nigerian Students. So we invited a Nigerian, and he talked. He made me feel proud because he said Nigerians were ruling the world. He said, what will the health service be in this country without Nigerians? And I would hold my head up and say, yeah, he's talking. You know, he said, Gatwick Airport is owned by a Nigerian. I say, yeah, great guy. Well done, brother. He was bigging me up. So why is it that we have such clever Nigerians in the UK and they're not so clever in Nigeria? Why? Actually, that's wrong. They're all busy getting distinctions. Honestly, in the university I am around, Lancaster, every year, someone always gets a distinction in their postgraduate studies. I don't want to embarrass Dr. Foluke, but she's one of them. Seriously. Where it isn't a lack of cleverness. And I see a lot of them go back to Nigeria, and I wonder why they're not doing great things. So someone talked about this doctor who did something great, this Nigerian who's doing something great. I don't know if it's the same one I know who was my senior in my secondary school. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon type person, whom I actually know. I'm proud to say I know him. He's doing great things, but not in my country. Not in his country. And I think not all, but a part of the answer is the perception of working here and the perception of working in Nigeria. See, I know, because I have heard it said, and we're going back to that narrow concept again. They say that when a European goes to Africa, he's an expatriate. When an African comes to Europe,
the migrant.
Now imagine if we treated Dr. Foluke as an expatriate. What would she get? Seriously. Think of her as an expatriate. What would she be? How influential would she be? Because I once lived in the house of an uncle when I was at the law school in Nigeria. He was the highest paid Nigerian in an oil company. When he left that position, strangely enough, the position was taken by a European who would not live in his house because he considered it below his dignity. And yet that house was centrally air-conditioned in 1989. It had international direct dial. It even had an answer phone, because once I was back home in Ibadan, I called him. I said, "Oh, uncle, I'm sorry, I wanted to..." And I heard, "Hello." And I started to speak. I was wondering why this silly guy wasn't even stopping to hear what I had to say. Terrible. I know. I'm exposing my lack of knowledge on this subject. But it was also in his house. I was coming home one day in a taxi, and a European stopped the taxi driver. And the taxi driver asked me to get out. Now imagine, I think I should come and do that. I should stop taxis here in Bristol. And see what would happen if I did that. It has consequences. What we think of our country is very, very important. It determines how we work within that country. Do you know, I want to tell you, because I think you would have heard that I'm a bit of a motivational speaker. It's true. So I want to tell you that we're all as clever as the next person. We really are. Our cleverness is not defined, but you knew that, by our skin color. See, my dad was once the president of the Nigerian Society of Engineers, even the vice president of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations. So, he said to me, while president, he said, to get a job as an engineer in Nigeria, as a consulting engineer or as a contractor, you needed a foreign partner. And then he said, while he was in school, he was beating these people in class. What's that all about? And yet he couldn't get a job. I couldn't get a contracting job in his country without them. How do we treat our fellow human beings? What are we communicating to our fellow black people? Are we communicating that they can do the job? Or that they can't? So yes, we can, it's true. That's what he said, wasn't it? We really can. But the most important thing in communication for me, and this is what I'm trying to say, is that it's only a part of the story, but it's important that I know who I'm with. It's also important that Antony knows that he's a great guy there, in charge of us all. And I'm really quite sad that Chidima was apologizing for doing an excellent job as a moderator. Every one of us needs to know who we are with, because that's what determines how we are. It's what determines what we accept. Actually, it's what determines what we reject. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm not sure I should be going after such such a good presentation. But then I'm just going to continue in the light of what he started to talk about. My name is Owonikoko. I am a development researcher and practitioner. My development research focuses on corporate social sustainability, basically around social and environmental performance. And I also work on ICT for development. And most recently, in fact, now I'm working on how ICT can help bridge the disability gap, especially in Africa, because the future of the world is ICT, and I hope that one day we can talk about how ICT can help us promote Pan-Africanism. But for today, let's just stay around the topic, because of course we have limited time. I'm going to continue in that trend, and I'm going to share a personal story, which I believe would help us understand that when we say yes we can, which was part of what he said, when we say Pan-Africanism, we are talking of a collection, we are talking of a collective people that are made up of individuals. And the essence or the extent to which that collaboration or that collection can work will be determined by how much individuals in that partnership, in that collaboration put into it. And that's why at the end of it all, it is not just, it's important we talk about Pan-Africanism, but it is also more important that we talk at individual levels, at the levels of you and I. Because if we don't fix that, then there is not we without individuals. We can only do what we can because individuals come together to do what they want to do. And we can keep talking about Pan-Africanism and come again next year and come every year to talk about this. If we don't take action individually, then we'll keep revolving around the same stage. And that's why it's very important that at this point or at several points in the conversation, we should bring it down to our homes, our families, our individuals. In 2015, I was part of a program called the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program in the US. And basically what the program was about is bringing young African leaders that the US recognized before the African government recognized. I've been working for 5 years before then, nobody recognized or did anything to me. But then somebody recognized us outside of Africa, which is still part of the discussion. Our inability to recognize talent. And then we come back to talk about brain drain. And part of my engagement in that program was a debate around the brain drain, which is on YouTube with the president of the US, then President Barack Obama. But then coming back to my story, there were 25 of us Africans from 23 African countries in a particular university in New York, Staten Island, Wagner College. And we were brought together to interact, to learn, of course. And there is no free lunch in, I hope I can say Freetown. Yes. Yeah. But then let's leave the idea of the long-term plan of the US aside. Staten Island happened to be a community of lots of Liberians, and there were Liberian churches. I'm a Christian, and one of the Sundays I decided to attend a Liberian church. And when I got there, they were singing Imagine, Imagine. It was interesting to me because I'd been told that they speak English. So I approached someone and asked that what exactly is Imagine, and I was told it means it's my home. And I was fascinated because I wasn't, it was a good fascination because I believe innovation is good, but more importantly, I believe adaptation is king. And if a group of people have adapted English language to suit their purpose, then I think it's a step ahead, just the way we have Pidgin English in Nigeria. And then I was, impressed that there's that kind of language that is different, English language, but not exactly English language. So I got back to school, and then I spoke with this my Liberian friend. If I just went to her singing Imagine happily, hoping she would, tell me that, oh, you learn our language. But do you know what she did? She reacted. She shouted, "Now, what do you mean? Are you saying our language is inferior? Are you do this? Are you do that?" And for once, I realized that one of the biggest problems of this Pan-African movement is the fact that as individuals, we respond to all of this narrative from a vulnerable point of view. And it does two things to us. It puts us in a position to express our narrative submissively. And by doing that submissively, we narrate what is originally ours, like we don't own the right to it. And we give whoever, the Americans, the Europeans, the authority to sanction what we say, even though it is our own story. Yeah. The other side to it is we tend to be aggressive. And the problem with being aggressive is like fighting a professional boxer angrily is going to beat you the more. Because the more angry you are, the more vulnerable you become. And that is at the point where we are at individual level, especially many of us as Africans. Because, of course, we cannot discount the many years, decades of slavery, colonialism, in building our minds to becoming that vulnerable. And that vulnerability is the foundation to many of the challenges we face as a continent. Leadership, corruption, the idea that I've been poor all my life, now I have this opportunity, I want to address this vulnerability. In essence, in short, we are feeding that vulnerability. And until we stop feeding that vulnerability, we are going to remain very, very vulnerable. In fact, we are going to continue to dig our own pit and bury our own selves. Because the people we engage with are people who are standing on two legs. They don't know it all, but they are patient enough to allow us tell them what to do with us. There's a proverb in Yoruba language that says, That is, the calabash will tell you where you put the rope on it. Because generally the calabash will have, some hole somewhere. And you don't have to make any effort to research to find that out. The calabash will show you itself. And that is exactly what we do. The moment, or the more we wallow in that vulnerability, fighting submissively or aggressively rather than assertively. And to be assertive is very simple. Coming with facts and figures with our head up high, understanding exactly where we are coming from. Not just for the sake of history, but for the sake of having a good stand to project a good future. Because for me, Pan-Africanism, the history is very important. I completely agree. By all means, I'm trying to learn the history of Nigeria, the history of Africa, even beyond what I was taught. But more importantly, I want to be able to say this is where our future should be. Because the purpose of history is not just for the knowledge, but it is to position us, to give us a good stand where we can ensure we don't repeat history. And if it is repeating itself, we can identify it and deal with it. But more importantly, we can forecast. We can decide our own future. Because true freedom is where we can say that this is the future we want and we are going to achieve it. Anything less than that is not true freedom. It's not the idea of Pan-Africanism. If the definition of Pan-Africanism is the recognition and coming together of Africans, then it matters what individual Africans believe. It matters what individual Africans think. It matters what individual Africans, what we are willing to do. And it is very important, especially for my generation. Because, you all say we are leaders of tomorrow, but we are leaders of today. Because in my own space, I'm leading. And all I need is a bigger platform, and I'm going to get there. And every one of us in my generation will get there. But the more important thing is, let us deal with this vulnerability mindset. The fact that we are inferior. We had that debate earlier. And, we all agree that the problem exists. But more importantly is our perception to the problem. And if we continue to feed a negative perception to the white hates us, the white colonizer, the white does this, we'll continue to remain in a point of vulnerability. Let us raise our head up high, understand this history, but more importantly, what is the purpose for which we study history? What is the purpose for which we are introducing Black humanity? What is the purpose for which we are gathering? What is the purpose of this conference? It is to chart a new future for ourselves, a collective future, one that we are proud of, one that we can own, one that we create our table for, and then we invite Europeans to come to our table, not debating that we must be at their table. Because that is essentially what international development discourse is. The table is owned by the whites, and then we are clamoring that we have to be at that table. We don't want to be at the second one. No! Leave the table for them. Do you know why they would always come to our table? Why they will always come to our table? I'll give you 3 reasons. Number 1, Africa is is the most important continent now. Because we own a large proportion of world raw materials. The SDGs, when it was being commissioned, it was explicitly stated that we cannot achieve the SDGs without minerals, without resources, most of which are in Africa. So they would come. The more we continue to fight to sit at their table, the more they understand that we don't even know what we have. And until we come to that recognition, but you know what vulnerability will do for us? It will blindfold us, it will disadvantage us from recognizing what we have. And that is why somebody will sit in very large gold mine and will still be, taking the money, corruption. Something that will not finish soon. Something that has the capacity to help everyone. Something that, money that you cannot finish alone. Money that, it's just being vulnerable. And that is the real poverty. The real poverty is not living less than $1. The real poverty is the mindset, the poverty trap. The idea that it will finish. When actually, so that is why when people say, there's a recent ODI report that says in the next few years, Africa will be home to the largest poor people in the world. But that is not even the story, because I feel the definition of international development for poverty is biased, is constructed. We can reconstruct it, and the reconstruction I'm proposing is the fact that we think giving other people an opportunity will take away our own opportunity. That is not true for Africa, because Africa is a land of opportunity that cannot be finished. So that's number 1 reason, raw materials. Number 2 reason is every corporation, DFID now is changing its strategy into private sector-led development. That means
means they would focus more attention on emerging markets, of which Africa is prime. The European market, every other market is saturated. They would come. Putting ourselves in the right situation would help us to negotiate appropriately when they come. There's nothing stopping us from owning at least half of every corporation that comes to Africa. But when we don't know ourselves for who we are, we cannot even negotiate properly because we are at their mercy. Because we have put ourselves, and they didn't put us. We have put ourselves. Maybe they tried to, and then we help them. We have put ourselves as their mercy. That's why when people ask me, when you go to, I don't live here. I live in Nigeria. I'm only schooling here and I'm going back. But they ask me, when you do this, are you not afraid you're the only black? I tell people, I don't even see color. I hear what you want to say. If it makes sense, I respect you. If it doesn't make sense, it doesn't matter to me. And that is how we should begin to think. Because the third point, which is very important, is Africa holds the largest share of the future labor force. 70% of, I think more than 50% of young people globally are in Africa. Which means that in the next century, and which is what Americans are saying, and that's why they have all sorts of exchange programs to bring people, because they know in the next coming decades, there will be an Africa working in every country, in every sector, because they don't have enough people to take care of that. China, for example, is going to have more older people than younger people. The young people cannot support that older generation. They will need more people. So those 3 points, the fact that we have the resources, the fact that we are in the next market, the fact that we have the highest number of young people should give us enough advantage, should help us understand that our vulnerability will not help us. We should step out of it. And in conclusion, I would give this example of, it was narrated to me by one of the chief economists at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. He told me that a few years back, she was sent to an African country to negotiate for a World Bank loan. I would not mention the African country so that you won't look at the country somehow. She was given a per diem for a week, no, I think 2 weeks. Because the expectation was that they will be back and forth to negotiate to do this. And then she told me that she went to that particular country and in 2 days she was done. And the reason was because they didn't look at the details of the document. They were just so excited that the money is coming from World Bank. Mind you, it is not free money. It is loan. And let me also let you know that most of the resources that brought that loan came from resources. I mean, most of the loan came about from resources from Africa. Either you like it or not, because let's not go into details for that. They did not bother. Either they are selling the future or whatever it is. It was signed within 2 days. And she narrated the other example of going to China on the same kind of arrangement, 2 weeks. She eventually spent a month because the Chinese looked at every clause, every dot, every comma, and they made sure the documents was according to what they wanted. In other words, they decided their future. If you are taking a loan, then take it for a good cost. So that gives us a good perspective of where we are as a people. Until we deal with this vulnerability and help our children. And education is an important part. I believe we'll still talk about how to deal with the narrative while we answer the question. But education is an important part of it, which is why I believe the curriculum discussion is important. However, the educational system in Africa is outdated. It's not suited for us. It's like copying the assignments of a further mathematics student. And you have never studied mathematics, you will not know what is wrong with it. Imagine, how many of you know what matrix in mathematics is? It's a complex dy dx. Copying the assignment and something is wrong and you are asked to fix it. You don't know because it wasn't built for you in the first place. That is exactly how education, maybe even governance, the so-called democracy that we practice, and a lot of other things are. I believe we'll still have time to talk more, but for now, that's it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karl Brown, and I'm here really to share my personal story about how I broke into law, and also to really emphasise the importance of employability skills, particularly for our young people. Before I share my story, I'd just like to really express my thanks to FACE for inviting me here today. I think it's a fantastic, exciting initiative, and really it touches upon the core themes of working together and collaboration and networking. And it's only through doing those particular points that as individuals, as a community, and as a continent, that we're going to be able to succeed in this world. my particular passion or specialism is really inclusive economic growth, and we can only really achieve inclusive economic growth if we overcome things such as the disparities between the attainment gap between black students and also white students, and also if we overcome the employability prospects and the discrepancies between white students and also students from Pan-African backgrounds. And I'm really pleased that those are part of the core aims and initiatives of FACE. So my talk is moving on up, and by way of background, I'm a commercial property solicitor at Clarke Willmott, which is a national law firm, and I'm also a social mobility ambassador for the Law Society. Social mobility is a massive passion of mine, and I think it's only through unlocking talent that we as a community will grow, and I think through doing that, we're also boost the economy overall by being able to give back to the economy fully. My background is, my parents came here in the early 1960s from Jamaica. We've been hearing a lot recently about the Windrush generation, and they were very much part of that generation. They came from a very modest, humble background. My dad was a plasterer, and my mum was a nurse. And I was born in Bristol born and bred, and I grew up in an area called Downend, and I went to the local comprehensive school in Downend. And like a lot of students, I didn't have any links to the professions, but it was my parents, it was through seeing their inspirational, hard-working ethos that I was always taught to aim high. So it's through aiming high, and it's through managing to get some work experience that I decided at school that I'd try to get a career in law. And so I left Bristol and I went to a university called the University in Hertfordshire. And if you wouldn't mind, I studied a law degree, and I really enjoyed it, and I found that I was really, really good at studying law, but I didn't have any networks at all or links with the professions. And so when it came to applying for jobs, I felt like I was smack bang in the middle of a maze. And I was saying to myself, how do I get myself out of this maze? And I started making applications for what I call training contracts, so positions as a trainee solicitor, and I got rejection after rejection. And I kept making applications because my parents taught me the importance of persistence and hard work, but again, I got rejections. And it was one afternoon, walking through Easton, rather dispirited, that I wandered into my barber shop, which is still there, and I sat in the barber's chair, and like you often do in men's barbers, I started offloading my problems, and I started saying, why is the world against me? How can I actually achieve my goals? And then it was through the importance of networking that my barber put me in touch with a local black solicitor who happened to be a partner at that time in one of the big law firms. And it was that partner who actually started mentoring me and giving me careers guidance. And it's through that mentoring and careers guidance that I started to focus my applications more, do more research, and actually manage to get more successful outcomes until I got a training contract. So how do you work your way through your maze if you're a young student studying law, for example? And the skills you need, you might just take it back, are reconnaissance, reconnaissance, reconnaissance. It's a phrase often used in the military, and essentially it means doing your research. You should target your applications. You should consider what are your unique selling points. Now, we touched upon, or the other speakers touched upon, sometimes that people from our communities have a lack of confidence. But in actual fact, we should have full confidence, because our unique experiences, our unique background should be selling points. And I was actually speaking with a friend who had another friend of African background, and he said that he started off working for a big law firm in London. He actually went on a trip for them back to Africa, and he established a network of business contacts and clients there. And it's through doing that that he actually managed to open a new Africa department for that law firm and became a partner. So I think that's just a lesson that we should really be confident in our background, and we can use our background to open up commercial opportunities for our employers. You should aim high with determination. Believe it or not, I made over 100 training contract applications. You should seek mentoring. And again, this is really touching upon the point of FACE, of establishing a network, a support group that will be able to not only show positive examples of people who have achieved, but will be able to give back to their younger people in giving those particular tips. And as shown on the last point on my slide, we should always emphasize the importance of networking. So what are the skills needed in commercial law firms? You should know your client's business. Now, as a lawyer, and as a young lawyer, it's often tempting to think that you can just get by your legal knowledge, but it's critical that you also understand your client's commercial business. Business skills, marketing, financial skills. It's assumed that you will also know your area of law, and some, if not all of those particular points will be relevant to other areas of law as well. I'd like to end my brief talk with a quote from a particular legend, Mahatma Gandhi, and some of you may or may not know, but Gandhi actually spent quite a significant period of his time working in South Africa and trying to promote the cause of freedom in South Africa. And I think the thing that we really need to instill in all of our young people is that particular quote, that you should be the change that you wish to see in the world. And you should not be afraid to be a pioneer. One of the things that I'm most proud of, out of all of my achievements, is that in 2014, I became the first black president of a local business group called the Bristol Junior Chamber. And I think that pioneer instinct, that instinct of not being afraid to be different, of being proud of your roots, which the other speakers have touched upon, needs to be instilled in all of our young people so that they have the confidence to navigate their way through the local education system into mainstream employment, or perhaps to set up their own businesses to contribute towards the overall economy. So thank you again for allowing me the chance to speak, and if you've got any questions, please raise them.
Thank you all so much for sharing with us today. The next section of this panel will really be more conversational. I think we can dispense with the microphone and project going forward because the system unfortunately isn't working anymore. In building on the insights you've shared, moving from Ife's reference to heroes and not being seen, representation of Africans, finding people, stakeholdership in the Pan-African vision, to Sola's reference to individual action in Pan-Africanism rather than a harmful generalization at the expense of development. And even Karl's reference to networking in a more career and employment context. You've all referred to your experiences. It seems we will be using them after all. But a question which you may already have addressed And if you have, I invite you to hand over the mic to your counterpart. You all have diverse experiences in your careers, spanning the diaspora and Africa, varyingly. What has been, I think, in particular, Sola and Ife, what have been your particular challenges in career development and entry, and how did you overcome them? And if they're still ongoing, what advice would you give to yourself, keeping students in mind to tackle these issues?
Okay. When I left school, I was disappointed in school because I felt school didn't prepare me enough for life. And I think that is still the case for what we call education in many parts of Africa. And I don't want to overgeneralize because I think the education on this side might present a better opportunity. But the fact that the educational system is not in touch with reality was one of the biggest challenges I had. And I had to re-educate myself to prepare myself for the world. Because entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, those are keys, those are important things that we need to continue the Pan-African struggle, if I may use that word. But not just the Pan-African struggles, to some of the key skills you listed here, soft skills, are things I believe should be incorporated in academic institutions. Because I believe an educational system that doesn't prepare us in character and in competence has failed. Even if it delivers competence without character, and by character I include soft skills, it has failed. So I believe that was one of the challenges I had to face. But then, of course, in this century, education is not limited to just the four walls of school. There are lots of opportunities to learn. So I had to educate myself, do what I have to do. And the other thing is the lack of mentorship, which I believe is very, very important. Presently myself and Dr. Owonikoko, who is, okay, maybe I should, is it okay? Yeah, the spouse to Dr. Clarke Willmott. He was, sorry, Dr. Owonikoko. He was my final year supervisor in school for my undergraduate degree. And I believe one of the reasons I was able to do as much that I've done is because I stayed in touch with him and he was able to mentor me through not just what I should do professionally, but what life is about. Where to keep quiet, where to talk, where to go, how to put references together and all that. And I believe young people of this generation need a lot of mentorship to pass on key skills that were very, very relevant in previous generation, but also to pass it on in a progressive way. Because, for example, teaching history is good, but how it is taught is also important. It has to be progressive for this time. Otherwise, it will not make sense. I believe those two keys are. If there's any other thing I'll have as we go. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, actually, you know how everyone's been talking about racism and ethnic bias and all that kind of thing. I once went to a course, and they said that the three most disadvantaged people in the UK are blacks, women, and people with disabilities. And I thought 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Well, it's a title of a song, by the way. Seriously. So I remember within about a year of being in the UK, I was with a Nigerian, and someone came to him, or maybe to me as well, but I didn't see him, and made some disparaging comments. He was very upset, but I was laughing. And the reason I was laughing was because I'd grown up in an area, even in Nigeria and here as well, where people looked at me slightly different. So that has been a problem. And we we have very different attitudes to these sorts of things, but that has been a problem. My solution actually is friends and family and networking. I grew up in a family that told me, even before I got to the United Kingdom, that I am worth it. And I think that's very important for it's part of what I'm saying to people. Sometimes we don't actually know what we're worth, but they're telling me that, and not just telling me, they're showing me that was highly instrumental when I looked for work and didn't get it. And in many other circumstances that I had to face with being 2 out of 3. I have friends who, so I wrote a piece one day and I was trying to remember what my friends had done. And I called that piece I wrote, "The Ordinary is Essential." And sometimes I found that people had done very ordinary things as part of their daily lives to me. So a friend was talking to me and said, "You know all those things you do," because I used to sort of proofread people's work free of charge there, because I actually said, "Why don't you start charging for them?" And I thought, what a silly idea. And then I thought, you'll starve if you don't start charging. And so I did. And shock and horrors, it worked. And I started charging people for basic things like proofreading. But I'd never have done it if somebody hadn't suggested it. And that wasn't the only thing. I found that a lot of friends and family have just been around and have just been there for me. But they've been doing it as part of their ordinary. When I was born, I could see a little bit. And my brother could write, obviously, because he could see. And he showed me how to write, because we had a blackboard at home. And he showed me how to write. So the first time when I had to do my signature, I had no difficulty because a 4-year-old had been showing me how to write my name. Just a small thing like that. You see, and so sometimes we don't value the small things that happen to us, but they become really useful in future. Thank you.
Well, in answer to the question, I did touch upon some of the difficulties I had in my career progression. So, for example, finding those positive examples of persons with profession and learning soft skills. And one of the big things that unlocked that for me was mentoring and also establishing a network. One of the persons who I see in front of me, who was on the previous panel, Marianique, is part of the Black Southwest Network. And I think, going back to the economy point, it's absolutely critical that we create our own economic opportunities so that young people see that there's a way forward for them to achieve and unlock their talents. One of the quotations that I literally read to myself every single day is from one of my favourite authors, and he says, "The people who get on in this world are the people who get up and look for the circumstances they want, and if they cannot find them, make them." And I think that we as a people have to try and look for the circumstances that we want, but if we cannot find them, make them. So start our own businesses, start our own law firms, and actually create those opportunities for ourselves. And in actual fact, that's not just something which will benefit us, but it's something which will benefit the wider society and wider economy, because it will then create a more inclusive society. So I think that's why, for me, FACE is not just important in boosting Pan-African communities, but in actual fact, it will help boost the local and world community as well.
That last point actually segues quite nicely into the next broader question concerning entrepreneurship and development, which, speaking to your various backgrounds, I think you'd be able to engage with nicely from your particular experiences. I encourage you to bounce off each other and even ask questions for the next question, which is really, what do you see as the main barriers to growth for small businesses and entrepreneurs in your respective fields? And adopting a multidisciplinary perspective or bouncing off of each other, how would you recommend they overcome these?
Okay, I'll just start. Yeah. So I co-founded an NGO about 11 years ago that started as an undergrad. I started while I was an undergraduate. And I'm going to build upon my last point, which, I wanted to narrate this, but then I figured I would still have the opportunity. The whole of the NGO started because I had someone who mentioned to me MDGs. I probably wouldn't have heard about that, MDGs. But then mentioning MDGs opened my eyes to, I've always been entrepreneurial from my junior school, trying to make extra money here and there. But then it became social entrepreneurship when I realized there's a lot more I could do for other people. Because I know I am a product of what other people have given to me. I always wanted to give back. So there was this final year seminar I was going to write, and then I was given a topic called I studied microbiology. The role of microbiology is in achieving the 7 points of President Musa Yar'Adua. That was the then president of Nigeria. And as a microbiologist, that was strange because ordinarily I would have been talking of some complex microorganisms. But the topic gave me the opportunity to talk about the social issues to microbiology. And then I got the best, the award for the best presentation. And that's opened my eyes to the fact that it's enough to know all the technical parts, which sometimes is the challenge I have with the academics. And I say that with all sense of respect. Connecting academics with industry is very, very important. Connecting academics with the society. And that's one of the reasons I appreciate this platform, because all we have been saying today is how we can connect researches and things we do in the classroom, in the lab, wherever we do our researches to. Because like he mentioned, the credit is for solving problems. If we do all of these and we are not solving real problems, then we don't find opportunity to sustain what we are doing. Because the sustenance comes with solving real problems. And sometimes when young people complain, especially those who want to do business, complain of lack of funding. I have never really lacked funding for my business. I run an auto care business in Nigeria that is 4 years old now, and it's growing. And for the first 2 years, we were looking for money, and then we realized that what we had been doing was just to sell the business, not the value, the real thing. And of course, with the mentorship support, we're able to identify values and all. And I'm saying all of this to buttress the fact that how we grow up, how we learn, the things we are taught, our perception about life, how we see life. It's not saying school is not an end. It's supposed to be a means. But when we make school an end, that just go to school. When you go to school, you have everything you need. It is wrong. And it is not going to help us. We should build it in such a way that go to school and then you can develop your vision and then live your life. One of the things my mentor made me do when I was graduating was to write a 10-year plan for myself. And I will tell you that I didn't exactly go that direction of 10-year plan. I achieved a number of them, but what it did for me was to help me appreciate what life is about, appreciate planning, appreciate hard work, appreciate the milestone, appreciate how to network, appreciate that there's a goal I'm working towards, and school was just supposed to be a means in the whole process. When we put all of this in perspective for young people, I think life will not necessarily be easier, but then we'll be able to find our way around the difficulties, and the benefits, the reward, or the benefits will be more rewarding, would be able to appreciate. And sometimes the reward is not the goal we achieve, it is the process. Helping young people understand, and that is what I do with every young person I have access to, and I think that is the responsibility we should have as the older generation to the young people, to help us understand that there is a process. Just like this Pan-African movement is also a process, one that we have to be committed to and not expect to see the result we want in day one. Because what got us into this is decades. What we worked in 100 years, we cannot work out in 1 year. It's going to take a process. But the more important thing is to have the process right, to understand what it takes, to share the value of mentorship, the value of hard work, the value of key African values, community, Ubuntu values. Those are the things that really matters. And I can give a lot of examples, but this is a summary of everything the examples we say.
paying attention to the real values, the process, and giving opportunities to people. One of the things that I was made to understand from the people I work with here in London is when they hear an opportunity coming, it's most likely not going to come from a black person. It's a UK-based consulting firm by a black man, but then most of the opportunities he has gotten are from white people. And he has this notion that black people don't give opportunity, they prefer to can it. And if that is part of the things we have, then we are going nowhere yet. Because it has to be a collaborative effort, sharing opportunities, and it is the process of sharing that new opportunities are brought. And we give people opportunities and all. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
I was so enjoying myself. Because I knew that when you had finished, I meant but the first thing I found actually as a problem was to identify what I was good at. I think most people really need to do that. Because when you start choosing your careers, you're probably about 16 or 17. So I went and I did a law degree, and I loved the law degree, I have no doubt about it. And I found that I liked to listen to the news. In Nigeria, it was the BBC World Service. So for my master's, I did international relations. But because the BBC World Service generally tended to focus on the Middle East, I focused on Iraq. So my master's was done at the time of the Iraq-Kuwait War, and my master's and doctorate were focused on Iraq, which my lecturer in African politics was very unhappy about, because I think he actually believed that all Africans must do African work as their postgraduate studies. But that's a completely different question. But I found that because I moved around law, international politics, all that kind of stuff, I was saying to someone the other day that when I was doing my PhD on Iraq's nuclear program, I had to actually understand the basics of how a nuclear weapon was made. Not I don't mean I could make one. No, just in case you were thinking of employing in your weapons of mass destruction facility. I didn't think I could make one, but at least I had to understand the process. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to talk about it in an academic and intellectual way. And I think we're becoming so interdisciplinary now, but that we also need to, within that process, find that niche area, And one of the things they taught me as a PhD was that at the end you have to contribute something that even your lecturers don't know about. But in order to find that, you had to go around this interdisciplinary process of learning physics in international relations, and using the doctrine of Estefel to prove that Iraq should have invaded Kuwait or something stupid like that. But the point was, throughout that process, I was finding for myself in my doctorate, my niche. And I think when I was setting up my company, I had to also do that. So I sat down for a while and I came up with this phrase, linking your ideas with the real world. And I came up with the idea that everyone's got an idea in them. And because you have an idea, sometimes actually communicating that idea may be difficult. And that became what I wanted to do. But the process does take a while. And for me, the process went through all manner of twists and turns and roundabouts. So I think that the first thing you need to do in entrepreneurship is to find out what you're good at. Don't just say because your neighbor, my good friend here, has set up an auto. I should do that actually, an auto repair facility. That should be interesting. Don't just say because someone else has done it and has succeeded, because a lot of my friends have done that actually. You hear a lot of people going, yeah, especially in Nigeria, the palm oil industry is really good. I'm going to set up, or the trading industry is really good. I'm going to set up a shop. But that may not actually be your area. So finding my area was the first thing. And then when I found it, the next step was, I know about the developing a plan and everything, but actually finding out how to implement. Because I could have a great plan. I found out that there are talkers and doers. A lot of great plans stop at the planning stage. And you have also to become someone who's doing what you plan. I think you can get so passionate. I actually said to someone, I can talk to you about my doctorate now, and you just tell me to stop because I'll talk for the next 3 hours. I guess every one of us can do that. We can really be passionate about. First of all, I'd like us to do what we're passionate about, but I'd like us to be ready to implement it, whatever that would take. I found, unfortunately, a third element of the plan is that you read in all these books that when you run a business, forget sleep. It was very difficult for me because I forgot sleep, and then I discovered I was getting less healthy. So it's actually work-life balance is actually more important. I think my work is really, really important, and I love it to the end of the world. But I also think rest is very important as well. And someone once said something, you do not work from a position, you do not rest from a position of work, you work from a position of rest. Thank you.
Well, I think there are general issues or problems or hurdles which entrepreneurs have to overcome, such as funding, finding a particular location or premises where they can work if they can't work at home. But I think the way to tackle it is in two ways. Last month, I hosted an event which Marianique attended, which was aimed at really trying to increase engagement in the local economy. And really, what I was trying to do was to emphasise to an audience from Pan-African communities, particularly, of what opportunities are out there. We touched upon the importance of soft skills when trying to progress in professions such as law, and it's similar in knowing what opportunities are out there. So knowing what opportunities are out there with the West of England Combined Authority, knowing, for example, that the Engine Shed, which is an entrepreneur hub, is making extensive efforts to try and reach out to all communities, because they know they have a very, very big issue and lack of diversity in the entrepreneurs that use their facilities. So it's knowing what opportunities are out there and knowing, for example, that you can get access to professional advice from certain organisations as well. But going back to the quote that I used in my last segment, if you can't find the circumstances, you've got to make the circumstances. Then if we can't find the circumstances, then we need to, for example, create our own hub of entrepreneurs where we can collaborate, exchange ideas, and really try and support each other. And again, I'd go back to the Black Southwest Network, because I know from listening to their talks and speak with people like Sado, who heads up the Black Southwest Network, that they're actually looking into creating a hub. So again, if we can't find the circumstances, I think we can if we reach out and engage and get out into the wider community. But if not, then we need to make our own circumstances, create our own hub to build our local economy.
At this stage, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions.
My hand before
If you could project, please, so that we can all hear.
Also tell us who you are.
Yes, my
I would
name
like
is
to know.
Liz Small. I'm self-employed, I'm a tour guide. I do tours around Bristol of African symbology, Contemporary Christ. I do cultural history cards, international safety cards, and I'm just passionate about anything to do with African history. My question, I think it's a question, is basically in terms of entrepreneurship and the theme of today, how do we, because I work from a principle of providing a business for myself, my family, my community, and my community. I find often there's a struggle with what I would see as African businesses in terms of supporting ourselves, but also in terms of the need of the African community. When I use the word African, I'm talking about people like myself as well as people from the continent. So, although I was born in this country, my ancestry is African. That's why I call myself African. But there is a struggle in terms of that, because in terms of business, I should say, and in terms of really deepening the economic wealth of what we do actually have as people of African origin. But when it comes to the cultural items for my community, there is a struggle in terms of what people of African origin want to buy, and often there's a struggle in terms of buying from our own people as well. So that's what the statement of the question, so I'll leave that with the panel to decide for that.
To clarify your question a bit, would that be there's difficulty accessing or sourcing or finding goods to buy and networking?
one example is I'm very passionate about African history, and I tend to, when I teach, I try to teach from a perspective eliminating enslavement of African people, because I think history tends to start from there for our people, and it's incorrect. So my greeting cards, for example, will talk about Africa's contribution to society, going back before or during the time of Christ. So just, in fact, if I look at an event here today with my cards, I probably would sell 4 rather than 40 or 50 for whatever reason. Does that make sense? In terms of where we are culturally, I don't feel that we're embracing who we are as people of African origin. I don't we're embracing our identity because we're still stuck in the enslavement. So the reason the cards that I designed is often seen as, I think people go to shop more than they can accept what they're reading on the card. So maybe see it as a lie, but no, we're not capable, or we weren't responsible for the design and making the periods. So anything to do with historical events, as far back as Christ, not further back in Christ, I've experienced there's kind of like a, I don't know, that's true kind of response. Not all the time, but quite a recognizable time.
I welcome the panel to respond, but noting we are short on time, and I would like to open the floor up to just one more question. Let's keep responses to 1 minute.
Well, it's not exactly related to your point, but one thing which I think we really need to emphasise is that I know that the current city leadership definitely recognises that we're not utilising our Africa connections. And so my thought point would be we need to utilise our African connections in creating trade opportunities for Bristol. And I think there's a massive opportunity for Bristol, if it does that, to really stand out and set ourselves apart from other cities in the UK.
All right.
So if I get the question correctly, it's about the struggle to narrate the story behind the culture, the tour.
Support and market.
Support and marketing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Of ancient historical contributions of Africa. So, yeah.
Yeah, fundamentally, I think it still revolves around the belief we have in our own culture. And I'm also going to add that it is a good thing that people like you are in charge and participating in this, because you become the custodian of the change. And one of the other things is we expect the change to happen so fast, but sometimes we have to wait through the process and keep doing what we are doing. By an assertive narration of our story, I mean emphasizing the positive values embedded in it and finding ways to create economic activities around it. It will require a lot of thinking, a lot of innovation, but it is important we do it. Because if we do not, so while coming here, I was thinking of the connection between entrepreneurship and Pan-Africanism. And I realized that one of the ways we can push this fast is when we have some level of dominion, economic dominion, social dominion. And the shortest way to have that is when we have some level of business success, academic success. Like he said earlier, we need some level of excellence before you can be listened to at some level. And that's why everything we do, we have to infuse that level of excellence in it, while proactively thinking of opportunities to expand it, be it on the commercial side, which I believe has lots of opportunities. But the point is, everything around culture and Africanism requires a lot of innovative and creative thinking. It is not one of those mundane things that we do the way it has been done. Because the challenges of this century are different. Because the way the world is moving, challenges are evolving, and our solutions must also be progressive. So while I may not have a one-word answer to it, it is very important that we understand that it's a change process, both for us and for the people we are dealing with, on every side. And also to understand that we are the custodians of change. And it never gets better than we make it. There's no magic anyway. And that was one of the things I was told early in life, which I hold on to.
That if I want it to be better, I don't believe in if it will happen, it will happen. If it will happen, then we shouldn't have been colonized because nobody wanted to be colonized, but here we are, so we have to do something proactively in order to make it better. I'm not sure if that perfectly answers the question, but that is my side to it.
Well, I'd like to come to your talk. The problem with answering your question is that my own philosophy has always been there are no general answers. Honestly, this is not a cop-out, but the best way to have answered your question is a one-on-one session, because I'd have to look at exactly what you're doing and how you're doing it. And you are right, because I talked about this communication thing. Sometimes we don't perceive that we're worth the effort of our achievements being recognized. And it's all about what our perceptions, what has been communicated to us, what we are communicating to others. That's the only general thing I can say. But the particular answer to your question will actually have to do with what you're doing and how you're doing it, and how you're marketing and how your marketing can be made different. I'm really sorry I can't give you any more general answers than that. But I am sure that there's a way to make that business grow. I'm absolutely sure about it. I just don't know because you've given me a very general scenario and it's a particular problem with the work you're doing.
You should come for consulting, that's what you just said.
No, I didn't say that. But I would welcome you. Indirectly.
I would like to conclude there, but if we can keep it strictly to 1 minute, I will accept one more question.
My name is Kamal Mushua. Clarke, African Connections Consortium here in Bristol. Isn't it maybe time so that we can maybe address the issue of the intergenerational trauma that we're actually suffering? That is obviously evident that we're not loyal to each other, we're not loyal to our culture, we are somewhat apophobic towards ourselves. This is why we do not even buy from each other. This is why we cannot trust each other. So shouldn't we try to address that mental side first?
Yes, in a one-word answer. And the point I've been trying to emphasise is the importance of collaboration. And if we don't help ourselves, then how can we expect others to help us? And again, touching upon one of the other points, we've got to try and come up with pioneering schemes and constantly trying to be progressive. And so my last comment or thought for FACE and this particular conference is in the interest of trying to be pioneering, in the interest of trying to make use of our connections, could we, for example, have some form of trade delegation to Mozambique, which we're twinned with, to show the economic opportunities in Africa for the UK and economic opportunities for African countries such as Mozambique in cities such as Bristol. So that's my last thought for the day.
I'm not sure there's so much to add to that. But just to give you an example of the Jews, the Jewish people are generally referred to as the most successful group of people. It's in almost every dimension. They are the most read in the US, for example. They have the highest number of Nobel laureates and all of that. But the important things that, one of the important things that made that possible is that community sense, which is indigenous to Africa, actually. The concept of Ubuntu means I am because you have because I am. But somewhere along the line, in the process of integrating culture, we lost that. Yeah. Growing up as a child, every kid in the street, we used to play together in the evening. And that built a lot of things. Resilience, appreciation of one another, understanding that because there are sometimes we have food in my house, they come to eat. Sometimes we don't have, we share all of that. But as we grow up now in Nigeria, I live in a flat where I don't even know what my neighbor does. And sometimes I don't see them. Everybody like sneak in, sneak out. And I believe at some level psychologically it will have some level of effect. And you know, I'm sure that's probably one of the roots of depression and all of that if you look at it deeply. But more importantly, it helps us to lose trust in ourselves. When I wanted to start a business, one of the first, because I needed a partner, I thought of my friends that we grew up together. I've seen them, they've cheated me. You know, I've seen what they can do. I understand them, I know what to, you understand what I'm trying, we've grown. And you know, this thing called trust doesn't fall from heaven. It grows as we grow. It grows because of communication, because of, you know, that community. That is part of what we should encourage, even in diaspora. Where I live here in London, in Brighton, I try to visit people, you know, when I visit them, I don't just rush in, rush out, keep my phone aside, let us talk. It will not make any sense for us to be brothers and you are suffering. And you know, that in the smallest sense is killing the idea of Pan-Africanism. And you know, we might do all of that to ourselves and then come to big platform like this and speak all the grammars and all. When at individual levels, we are not doing what is necessary. So, part of what we should be talking about is that community. It is I believe it is fundamental to the success of Africa. And until we bring that back, we might not go anywhere. Patronizing ourselves in business. You know, one of the ideas I used to have is having an education trust fund, just amidst my friends, because I have like 7 friends that belong to the same association wide in the union. Let's put all of this together. Let's build that was my crude idea. Let's build a school, grow it, so that in the future none of our children would have to face to face. That was what I told them. And it's thinking about it, it's a big thing. Because not just our children will benefit, other children will benefit, and we don't have to struggle the way other people will struggle. You know, it starts from simple thinking like that, education trust fund, health trust fund, taking care of one another. Because at the end of the day, how much land does a man need? I wish there was a time I would have told you the story of how much land a man needs. It's not much, it's just 6 feet. So if we have all the land in this world, and we don't remember that what we actually need is just a bit, then we are missing the essence of being an African. That's what makes us different from Europeans, I don't want to keep mentioning. That's Africa, that's community spirit of sharing everything. We have to find it, we have to bring it back.
I think something that has emerged is that the process is not an easy process. So the lady before you also said that she's finding that difficulty that the people who are not patronizing her are her own African brothers and sisters. But to tell the truth, the process is long, and as has been stated, communication is really important. The more we stay close to each other, the more we trust each other, the more we work together. And Shola said earlier, he said he's a Christian too. Someone was told me about Abraham, and the biggest test Abraham ever had was when God said he should sacrifice his son. But before we got to that point, there was a relationship building exercise going on, you know, where they were talking to each other, where God even said, oh, you know, shall I hide from Abraham something that I have in my life? So the relationship was growing and growing. And I think that's what we need to do. So a friend of mine, another guy, he said that he was invited to a networking event, he said, and he said, look, I don't believe in networking. And so I gasped, what? He said, no. He said, actually, what we should be building is not networks, but relationships. And he created a new phrase, which he has copyrighted or patented, called relationology. You can look for it. His name is Mike Bird. And so it's not about building relationships, he says. And that's closer than networking. So we've always thought of networking as joining this or that organization. But as my brother here just said, it's about being together, it's about understanding each other, it's about learning to trust each other. Imagine if your spouse and you were a networking group. What would that be like? You probably have a meeting once a month or something stupid, you know, that kind of thing. But you have a relationship. That's why you trust each other. And the moment you stop communicating, trust goes. That's just how it is. But it takes a while to build that trust. And if at this point you're finding that, there is still that problem where we don't trust each other, all I can encourage is that you start building the trust. You start working to build the trust. Thank you.
Sorry, to jihad. We must understand that trust is a two-way thing.
Oh yeah.
So while you're expecting trust, we also have to be trustworthy, because one of the things that collapse the foundation is not having the capacity to be trusted. And I think that is important too.
Please join me in appreciating our panel.